Ladies and gentlemen, these last few weeks I've been enjoying an excellent documentary series on the BBC called Africa. Maybe you've seen it yourself. It tells the story of many different animal species across the African continent. The series is presented by the legendary David Attenborough, who has been the voice of nature programs on the BBC for over 60 years. He is also known abroad because of the fact that the BBC have sold his programs to many other countries, and they've been dubbed into other languages, or subtitles are given in order to allow people to watch him in many different languages. Seeing a wide range of fascinating creatures on screen, thanks to this documentary, has made me think about what it must be like to see these animals up close in real life. On the few occasions I've been lucky enough to see rare wild animals up close, it has normally been on planned trips or tours. This made me think about the impact that such excursions out into the wild can have on local wildlife. When we venture out into the wild to see wild animals, what effect do we have on Mother Nature? Do tourists selfishly ruin natural habitats just for a few nice photos? Or do they contribute to the conservation of natural environments by raising awareness about the plight of animals in the wild? In order to start analysing this issue, we should be reminded of one key point. Most wildlife tourism is carried out in developing countries. Generally, those who take part in this kind of tourism are from wealthy countries in the global north, and the areas which are being visited tend not to boast a high standing on global development rankings. On the other hand, this may appear to be some form of neo-colonialism. It may seem that rich Europeans and North Americans are benefiting from the pleasures and delights of an impoverished country. Furthermore, these are pleasures that the local population would never be able to afford for themselves. And to add insult to injury, often the developing country in question is a former colony of the Westerner's home country. Often colonial abuses were committed in previous centuries by the very same rich European country which the wealthy tourist has just flown in from. However, one benefit of wealthy tourists flocking to poor countries to watch wildlife is that it helps the development of the region. In many parts of the world, the local economy would have no hope if it were not for wildlife tourism. The fact that tourists visit an area means that local people are employed in hotels and restaurants. It means that roads and hospitals are built, which benefit both the wealthy visitors but also the local population. It also means that the world becomes more aware of the country in question and the particular problems it may face. Thanks to tourism, many developing countries feel that they are more recognized and respected globally. However, one should consider the impact that wildlife tourism has on animals themselves. The fact that more hotels and resorts are built in a certain area can clearly have a devastating effect on wildlife, for example. Natural habitats are destroyed to make way for hotels. Electricity and water supplies have to be put in place, often running right through the feeding sites of a particular species. Viewing sites are set up which scare away animals and disrupt their routines. Animals become more accustomed to the presence of human beings, and this can modify their natural life cycles. And what is worse is the fact that often these effects are unnoticeable to tourists. They often simply do not realize the damage they are causing because they cannot see the full picture. A group of tourists may disrupt the breeding patterns of local forms of wildlife simply through their presence, without even being made aware of what they are doing. A common problem brought about by wildlife tourism is disruption to animal feeding patterns. Tourists often cannot resist the temptation to offer a bit of food to animals they go out to see. This modifies animal behavior and can sometimes mean that animals abandon the area where they traditionally feed in favor of sites where food can be begged from tourists. Sometimes, if the flow of tourists suddenly stops for whatever reason, animals no longer know how to look for their natural source of food. This was noted in particular in the 1970s, when grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park mainly fed on the waste left behind by tourists. When this practice was brought to an end, the health of the bears was seen to suffer significantly, and they were seen to have lost considerable weight. Relationships between animals can also be disrupted. For example, one group of seals in Canada were found to spend a great deal less time caring for their young because of the amount of time they spent watching tourists. However, there are many positive benefits to wildlife tourism that should be applauded. Earlier, I mentioned the human benefit of wildlife tourism. Thanks to visits by foreign tourists, certain regions see higher levels of investment. They benefit from increased visibility and become more developed. However, in many ways, there are also benefits for the animals themselves. For example, many owners of hotels and holiday resorts have a vested interest in ensuring that they preserve the natural habitat around them. There is an incentive for those who earn money from tourism to restore and protect the natural habitats of the wildlife around them. Otherwise, the animals that so many people travel to see will move away or die off, and tourism in the region will come to a halt. Secondly, wildlife parks, nature reserves, and zoos contribute to protecting rare species. By setting aside land for these animals to live on, nature reserves ensure that many types of animals are able to survive. In many cases, certain endangered species are only able to survive in the protective environment of a zoo because their natural habitat no longer exists. Often, wildlife parks help to breed endangered animals and then release them back into the wild. Other parks and attractions make sure that they contribute a certain share of their profits to conservation in the wild. In addition to these points, those who visit endangered animals gain a heightened awareness of the problems that these species face. This means that they are more likely to make voluntary contributions to help conservation efforts. They are also more likely to spread awareness of endangered species when they return home. This means that people are more likely to modify their behavior in order to help wildlife in the future. A deeper understanding of the difficulties that certain species face helps the plight of wildlife in general. This can also lead to greater research into biology and natural ecosystems, which will in turn benefit wildlife. Finally, if more tourists are present in a certain area, this means that it is more difficult for poachers to carry out their activities. If tourists are regularly passing through an area in order to observe animals, they are more likely to spot any illegal activities being carried out by poachers. This can help in the fight against illegal animal goods being sold on the black market, for example. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have been able to give you a balanced overview of the arguments in favor and against wildlife tourism. Visiting animals in the wild can be a fascinating and mesmerizing experience. Watching wild animals with one's own eyes is always more memorable than a TV show or visiting a zoo. Observing how animals act in their natural environment can be breathtaking and astounding. However, we should all consider the wider effects of our actions, taking into account both the positive and negative repercussions of our choices. Thank you.